Today, we are talking about generative AI, tools such as ChatGPT. What's the impact on the enterprise? Our guest is Nicola Marini Bianzino. You're CTO of EY. Tell us about your work.
I'm responsible for all the technology that generates revenue for the firm. So I spent the last 2 years developing what we call the EY Fabric, which is effectively a platform, a data, and with several components like actually artificial intelligence on top of it that powers our service offering. So we have about 1.5 million clients that are using it every day.
It's interesting. We don't think of a consulting firm as being a technology organization, but obviously you are.
I don't think there is any organization that can be not a technology organization at the same time. I think technology is, and look at what we're going to be talking about today, right? Technology is so pervasive in our lives that there is no business that doesn't use it. And then, if you start thinking about the consulting organization, when we provide services to our clients that are very data intensive, technology becomes so central and so fundamental to the quality of the service that we offer, the ability of doing it in across many countries, et cetera, et cetera.
Nicola, products like ChatGPT, Google is coming out with their own version. Microsoft has adopted this now in Bing. It's so popular, but why, as an enterprise CTO, do you care about this?
I think what we're going to see, first of all, it's an arms race, which is great, right? Because usually when big players are competing with each other, we tend to benefit from it, right? As consumers, in this case, or enterprises. So it's very exciting where we're going to be going next in terms of the capabilities of the technology. But be more specific about generative AI, and I'm looking at my own organization, for example, right, which is a knowledge-intensive organization. The ability to summarize knowledge in the way some of these language models are capable of doing is absolutely opens up an endless number of opportunities for organizations. So, for example, how do you systematize the knowledge within the organization? How you build ontologies in the organizations? How do you give advice, right, to clients? Or how you have, for example, scenarios where you have a sort of a co-pilot, right? So in pretty much any one of the roles and the jobs that we have in our organization, right, we would definitely benefit of having an intelligent agent sitting beside us, every day, not replacing us, but supporting our knowledge and our capabilities, right, in everything that we do. So endless possibilities. And so also not only in the enterprise, but also in our lives, I think there will be a significant impact.
As a practical matter, as you think about these generative AI capabilities, how do you think about it? Do you break it down into areas that you think might be useful, or is it still just too early of an exploration phase, or where are you in your thinking?
I think it's going to go very, very fast. We're already exploring. I mean, in our specific business, right, which is to give advice to clients based on our knowledge or regulations, our knowledge of other interaction with other clients, etc. The ability of tapping into their knowledge in a way that is multidimensional, like some of these tools can do, is absolutely incredible and fundamental. So we have several projects already at EY that are tackling that. But I think what is most fascinating about this latest development is, so we had chatbots for a long time, really. I don't know exactly when we started, but, I would say some companies had their chatbots for at least, 8 to 10 years, right? But what is different about this one is the fact that you actually can have a conversation with it. Sometimes it's for chatbots, you are doing as a consumer, right? You go onto a website because you want to have some more information about the product, or you're complaining about the product or something, right? You get into this very frustrating, interaction with the chatbot that if you don't exactly hit the question the way the chatbot expects it, then you go in nowhere, and at least this is what I do. You get to a point where you say, please, I want to speak to an agent, a real human, right? And these tools now that are coming to the market are actually very different because they allow you to actually have a dialogue because they can maintain the state of that conversation, right? So the previous chatbots, you ask a question, you get an answer, and that's it. There is no memory of that interaction that the chatbot can retain. But now you can. So you can go, it's almost like I call it, but maybe a little bit abusing the term, but it's sort of a dialectic of AI, right? So where you ask a question, you get an answer, and you ask another question, and you get closer to what you want to get out of it, as opposed to a sort of an expert system where it's question and answer, and that's pretty much it, right? So it's very interesting. I think that is the feature that to me is most exciting.
Would it be correct to say that you feel the defining characteristic is this
Yeah.
ability to retain the state of the conversation?
There are so many other things that are great, right? The ability of writing in multiple languages, right? So I'm Italian originally, right? So that's my first language. It writes as good in Italian as it is in English, right? And you can ask the questions. You can envision, like, meetings where you have everyone speaks his own language, which I think it would be an incredible, for global companies, would be an incredible achievement, right? Today we still have to. There is still a lot of lost in translation, but these tools are so refined and sophisticated now that even the nuances of a translation can be really, highlighted in the right way, which is incredible.
We have a question that's come in from Twitter already, which is an important question from Arsalan Khan. Arsalan's a regular listener, and I always thank Arsalan for his wonderful questions. And he says this. He says, when we use AI as a co-pilot, we have to be careful about the data it is pulling in order to give us suggestions. If we aren't aware of biases or stereotypes in the data, then what should we do? It's one of the fundamental questions of dealing with these types of technologies.
Absolutely. I have lots of people that inside my own company, right, they reach out, say, I want to try GTP. How can we use it with clients? I said, so a word of caution is, I think it's well warranted at this point, right? Meaning that you are the human in charge, you know what I mean? So it cannot delegate completely the work to these agents because they're not yet at that level of being able to understand, our ethical code, right? The morality, then, what is acceptable or not acceptable, unless it has been labeled by another human, right? So the human in the loop approach is absolutely essential here, right? So I use it as a sort of an aid as opposed to a delegation of responsibility, right? That cannot happen. So the human has to be in charge. And hopefully the human, I mean, you can argue that even the humans has a lot of potential flaws, right? In terms of what kind of answers, is capable of giving. But, we're not for sure at the point yet where we can delegate a function to, a tool like this.
I heard a very interesting comment yesterday on the news from a journalist who said, as a reminder, that tools like ChatGPT or what Google is going to come out with, all of these tools, they're really like advanced autocorrect on your phone. They give the appearance of sentience, but it's just like autocomplete.
We could go into a very long philosophical conversation on what is sentience, what sentient really means. But I agree. I would say the autocorrect maybe is a little bit too trivialized, right? As a definition, definitely is not. So if autocorrect is on one end of the spectrum, and on the other end is sentience, like it's in the middle, right? So I think we need to understand. So sometimes, we tend to, whenever there is a new technology, especially these kind of technologies that are a little bit more difficult to understand because they're actually quite complex, we tend to give them either, kind of transfer, a sort of alienation, right? We transfer to them the expectations that we have from another human being, right? So if we do that, that is the wrong approach, right? This is not a human being. This is a bunch of silicon, and a lot of data that gives you some kind of an answer. But if you actually think about it as a sort of an aid, right? I'm taking an airplane to go from San Francisco to New York. That is what these tools are. So it's a machine that helps you do things faster, right? But if you think about it, it's not that different than at the beginning truly of the mass adoption of the internet, right? So I graduated in the 90s from university, right? So whenever I had to do something, a research paper, I had to go to the library in my city to find the physical book, and it was taking forever to get the information out, etc. Then the search engines came up, and that was like incredible because you can access the whole knowledge of the human race, at a keystroke. And so that doesn't mean that we assign to that technology like a superhuman ability, right? It's something that helps you search things better. And the same, I think we need to look at these new tools in that same way. Show me what's possible. So show me the search criteria, show me what the search results are, and then I need to be the one that makes the decision on what is relevant and what is not.
I think one of the challenges for folks in the enterprise or just in our personal lives is that the answers these tools give comes across as being authoritative,
Yes, yes,
but it may be totally incorrect.
absolutely. And that is what we shouldn't. This is the thing, right? If we think about, if we start talking about human characteristics and we transfer them to describe a tool, we make a mistake, right? We will never call, a car like, fast legs, or maybe that's a wrong example, but you see what I mean? So, but if we use them and say, okay, so we need to put them sort of in a box, right? And say, like today you do with some of the search, you do a Google search, right, and it comes back like with millions of pages sometimes, right? So it's up to us to select what is the page that has the highest level of relevance for what we're looking for, right? We need to look at it the same way, as opposed to, oh, okay, there is a superhuman intelligence that knows everything, right? So that's why I think when you think about academia as well, I think if we start relying on these things too much, right, we lose the fundamental understanding of a domain or a subject, right? It can become a little bit dangerous from that perspective.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button at the top of CXOtalk.com, our website, and subscribe to our newsletter. Well, we have another question from Twitter that's related to this, and this is from Chris Peterson, who says, in business communications, whether it's B2B or B2C, do we have an ethical duty to call out what's written or edited by an AI assistant? He says, if a human reviews it, modifies it, and hits send, does that change this ethical duty?
Today, when you publish a paper, there is a process to publish a paper, right? So you need peer reviews, you need to, cite your sources, you need to do all these type of things. Okay. You cannot just say, I came out with this, right? Without, that would be plagiarism, right? So I think there has to be a framework similar to that one in this space, right? So if I'm like doing, for example, like, a client, for example, asks me about whatever, some regulation somewhere, right? I can do some research and I can use ChatGPT, or I can use another tool, or I can use, my own traditional Google searches or something to get the information out, my own internal knowledge, and to provide that answer, right? So when I do that in an email, right, as long, I think, it is fine to do it as a human being, right? So I don't know why there shouldn't be any other way. But if I'm producing a paper just using that, right, relying on somebody else's work, and I don't, recognize that, and I don't do the citations, and I don't do this and that, then of course, I'm getting into plagiarism. I think it's the same way that a human would be doing in a research paper like that. So complicated. So I think there is the need of, especially in the IP, in the whole, legal discipline of intellectual property as well, that there is a need of some kind of a rethinking about some of the fundamentals of that, because this is different.
Yeah, and clearly there are a whole set of ethical and
Yes.
legal issues.
Yeah. Absolutely, right. So and so that's why I think we need. It's funny, the philosophy, right? Probably the most ancient academic discipline is still, very much alive, because we need to ask ourselves all these questions, right? And we need to have frameworks to to address them. Like, it wasn't when the beginning of intellectual property came up as a protected, right. In those days, like when the legislation started to get introduced, there were similar conversations I'm expecting, right? So you're not supposed to take somebody else's intellectual work and make it yours, right? And so I think we need to have that dialogue today. What is going to be much more difficult today is that these tools, the marginal cost of producing or generating, this type of documentations or whatever we generate is almost zero. So we will be inundated by this volume of documents, papers, books, images, and stuff. And it will be really hard to understand what is really generated by a human, what is not, etc. So, maybe like Chris was asking, like identifying that content would be, a really good step, first step, I guess.
And this is Arsalan Khan comes back again and he says, when everyone is, quote, doing AI, what sort of governance structures should be placed? And I love this. Let's write a thesis on this. What sort of governance structures should be in place at an organizational level, as a governmental, and at a global level? Why don't we just simply start with organizational governance of AI? That's going to become important, very important. Any thoughts on that?
So, for example, I was mentioning the example of a knowledge company, right? Like ours, right? So, first of all, you want to be able to store that knowledge in a way that is relatively secure, in the sense that not secure, I mean, of course, from attacks from the outside, but that's one piece, but also secure in the sense that is the knowledge that the company wants to protect, right? So the knowledge, so if you think about an ontology within an enterprise, right, and you have the definition of some entities or concepts, you want to make sure that that definition is shared by everybody, it is approved, etc. Right? So I think there is that kind of a need of establishing a sort of an, I'm going to say this, but probably it's the wrong word, right? It's a sort of an editorial board, right, for this type of knowledge that gets systematized within the knowledge repository of the enterprise. So the concept of, what is revenue, for example, for an audit company, right? It can be different than what is used, on the street. And so when people search for the word revenue, there has to be an approved definition of it behind the scenes. So to me, that is highly curated content. So you have to have an organization, I believe, that looks after the, make sure that nothing, if you ask revenue and it gives you another answer, that's not good. Okay, so that type of, potential divergence has to be understood, has to be prevented, and has to be managed. So that to me is the key. In some other areas where they kind of, being true to the book definition of things is not that critical, I think, a little bit more dialogue could be welcome, right? And I think we need to let the tool itself learn and evolve, etc. So too much controls and too much governance, I don't think is going to be a good thing. So I guess the answer is it depends, right? Typical consulting answer, but it depends in the sense that, what is the type of knowledge that you want to maintain, govern, and protect, as opposed to the other ones that you want a little bit more free flowing and more interactive.
That makes a lot of sense. And looking at other important domains inside an organization that require governance, just this is a natural kind of a approach to use that as a model, but then be open to the fact that, as you said, generative AI will change and evolve over time. And so we can't be too locked down about it.
You cannot constrain it too much, I think, because otherwise you lose the value of it, right? It's just curated knowledge, and curated knowledge, it's rear view knowledge, right? So you're not able to anticipate what's coming.
We have another really interesting question, short question, hard question from Anil Vyas. And he says, what kind of jobs may become redundant by generative AI tools?
I don't think this technology yet. Okay. I don't know about the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. That's different. But right now, I don't see the delegation of a function completely towards another tool. Even if in the creator's economy, right? Even if you create art, like digital art in your life, that's your job. I don't think it can be completely created by the machine, right? We're seeing, AI art, etc. But at the same time, I think if you are an artist and if you are a creator, there is a lot of additional value that you can add on top of what the machine creates by itself, right? And so in the enterprise, I see more jobs created than less than jobs disappearing, right? Because I see a lot of opportunity, for example, for people that can systematize data in a different way, right? Or can again, like I am very big on this concept of ontologies, because I think if you can store the enterprise knowledge, there it's value that translates into shareholder value, right? And it's also like allows you to protect the IP and the capabilities of an organization, right? So think about our organization, 360,000 people, 8 hours a day is 2.4 million hours of work every day. If you can capture the knowledge, structure it in a machine, and then give access to it to our clients, to our own people, that makes our company even more valuable than what it is. So I see more opportunities than less, if that makes sense.
You have been alluding to and talking about this knowledge management function. How does generative AI change knowledge management relative to the historical tools?
If I look at my company, right, I'm not going outside of our business. That is to me is the low hanging fruit. Okay, that is so the fact that we are able to access all that knowledge and the fingertip in a way that is human friendly. So today, right, if I had to say, for example, in our tax business, if I had to help a client, understand the taxation regulation around 10 countries, usually I had to read like, millions of pages of stuff, right? And it has to be an army of people doing it. If I have a tool that with level of confidence summarizes all that information, I can spend more time talking about with clients about their options than just, reciting what the regulations are doing, right? So people will be happier, will have access. Of course, everything has to be curated, as I said, right? Especially in this type of businesses, it has to be curated and managed and governed, etc. It cannot be the Wild West, right? Because you don't want to, then the machine thinks that, we're looking at the legislation of Switzerland, and in reality, we need to talk about Austria, right? So that is a potential issue, right? But when you have done that, I think, the research and the work that we'll be doing will be more like the number of hours that we spend doing more valuable work will be, I think, higher, and people will be satisfied, and the quality of the work that we'll be doing will be higher as well.
How will these kinds of tools change work inside an enterprise?
In every business application, right? The one that we build, that we don't have it yet, but we're going in that direction, is to have like I will have my little sub window or a frame on the side of the main screen that allows me to ask questions on the fly in real time about what I'm doing. And so think about like someone gets out of school, right? 23, 24 years old, out of university, they joined our company, right? Instead of, getting them to do like, weeks and weeks of training and making sure that they get to the right person as a mentor, etc. They can do that, of course, because the human relationship is so important. But at the same time, if they can access their knowledge, institutional knowledge codified in the system, I mean, it will be much easier for them to work and to grow, right? So I think that to me, that's what the co-pilot concept, right? It's not like that function will be automated or replaced, but I have this agent that I can talk to and ask questions. I mean, it would be fantastic. I wish I had that at the beginning of my career.
I do a fair amount of writing and I use ChatGPT, and I just subscribed or was put on the user list for Microsoft's Bing, and I can't wait for Google to come out with their product. And I actually subscribe to several of these products. And as a co-pilot, I have to say it's a phenomenal thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the body of knowledge. the efficiency that it helps and just coming up with new ideas. It's very fast, much faster than I could do on my own.
Absolutely. And the new ideas, I mean, they're not really the machine. This is the thing, right? We shouldn't think about so alienating ourselves in the sense that we give this tool, too much responsibility in terms of their level of intelligence, because ultimately there is always today at least there is always a human behind the scenes that has curated the content, has structured it in a certain way, has trained the model in a certain way, so it's still human knowledge, right? But the nice thing about it is that you can have access to it immediately. So I was making the example earlier of the old school hard cover type of library, right? You have to find the book, in the library to be able to talk about a specific domain. Here, you can have access to an incredible amount of data, like very, very quickly.
We have another really interesting question from Anil Vyas, and he says, if the data set that trains the generative AI has an intrinsic bias, how can we get rid of this bias or overcome this bias so that it is neutral? And I think he's talking in two things. One, from the point of view of the software developer, and number two, from the point of view as us as consumers, as users.
The people that manage the data that trains the model, right? That's what fundamentally comes down to, right? So if you feed it in the model racist, type of concepts, right? The model will return that. So that is of bias, of any kind. So it's fundamentally it's a human responsibility, right? So in enterprises, as I said earlier, we need to govern that. We need to have, a sort of first of all, we need to have values, right? The enterprise level values, so things that you wouldn't do and not do, because they will help guide what is the concept of bias and how people should manage that part, right? And then at the same time, I think, as I said earlier, there has to be an editorial board of some sort that oversees and takes the responsibility for what goes into the machine ultimately, right? So I think it wouldn't be there is risk for sure, right? And it's something that we need to take very seriously.
This is again from Arslan Khan, who says, when it comes to life and death situations and the AI is wrong, who should we sue? The AI vendor, the data owners, the algorithm creators? Who do we sue when something really goes wrong?
I think we should not get in the position when it's a question of life and death left to a machine. That to me is the number one. So if you have to get to a position where the machine has to make a decision that has, the power of, driving an event of this level, I think there is something wrong in the way we're approaching it. These technologies are not at that level yet, right? So we don't, we don't want that, I think, yet, until it can be proven in a different way. So if, let's say, it's a medical diagnosis that has to be provided, the expectation is that there is always a physician in charge with the help of the tools, right? But fundamentally, it's down to the human. So it would be really, even you can think about, just stretching out a little bit from just the generative AI piece of it. Even we're not ready yet to do full self-driving cars, right? For a number of reasons. But one of the reasons is not just technology, it's about that kind of who's liable, who's accountable, what kind of ethical decisions that need to be taken, etc. So if we're not ready there, which is in a way is a more mechanical way of doing it, we shouldn't be ready to delegate again, the responsibility for this type of decisions to just a machine yet.
We have another great question this time from Elizabeth Shaw on Twitter. And she says, why do tools such as Google Bard or ChatGPT hallucinate even when it's using correct source data? And what are the implications, therefore, for using these kinds of tools for knowledge management inside an organization like EY?
There is the risk, right? Because at the end, it's reinforcement learning. You learn, and the answer that gives the best results are the ones that win, right? So there is a sort of a you know a selection mechanism of the answer. So if the answers that are rewarded are those that are going, on a tangent, probably you can get in this scenario. This is, at the end of the day, it's a statistical tool, right? So, I mean, we call it artificial intelligence, whatever, but effectively it's the application of statistics, right, to a very complex problem, but it's still statistics. And so there are absolutely situations where statistics gets you into the outlier, right? Absolutely. So that's possible. Even, I don't know, I'm not a mathematician, but I'm sure there are lots of ways that this can be described mathematically. In terms of what needs to happen for the enterprise, I said it earlier, right? That should not be allowed, right? Because you don't want to have, a tool speculating on what tax legislation might be if I look at our own business, right? So we need to give specific answers to clients. That's why this kind of a curated approach to it, for the time being is absolutely critical. So it's an investment that every company needs to make, both from the bias, the ethical side, but also for the content of the answers and the questions, etc. So there has to be some sort of a labeling that happens on the tool when you give an answer and you train it, right, to make sure that this is the answer that is proper, right?
Can I ask, to what extent are you thinking through these kinds of processes at EY?
We are experimenting, so we're trying to understand, how much work needs to be done, etc. So we are in the process of defining all of that. I think that's why, the previous questions was, are we gonna replace people? I don't see that. I think, the more we use these tools, the more we need to add human expertise to it. So it's going to be the opposite, right? I think for at least for the next, few years until these tools mature and there is more knowledge about it, there is definitely the need for investing in the enterprise, in human capabilities around that.
Chris Peterson on Twitter comes back and he's asking if you have any thoughts on cybersecurity issues created a need for the cyber insurance industry. And do such firms and policies have a role in shaping and governing the use of AI in the enterprise regarding liability?
I think in the future, probably yes. I don't see any enterprise function completely delegated to AI. And so if it's always a sort of a centaur model where there is the human and the machine together doing something on behalf of the enterprise, I think fundamentally it's just the same level of liability and responsibility that you have today. In the future, okay, so for example, let's say, credit decision or other type of things without going into the most dramatic, healthcare related decisions. I don't see why not. There could be some level of insurance, but I haven't, in my understanding so far, okay, and it's for sure not complete. I haven't seen anybody yet that is planning to completely, run a piece of a business like that in an automated fashion.
What are some of the challenges that you see to adoption of these kinds of tools in the enterprise?
One is overhype. I've done, for most of my career, AI, right? Starting from school, basically. And I've seen these ebbs and flows of excitement, right? So I started really in 97 and it was like, the winter of AI, nothing really happened for years, right? Even if there was a lot of potential. In those days, it was all about expert systems, that kind of knowledge, because we didn't really have the technology in terms of the processing power, the memory and all those kind of things. Then he started getting into, some games, that were win, like, the chess world championships, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not going to make the whole history, but every single time that there was a major breakthrough, like the one, the Big Blue with IBM did in the 90s, beating Kasparov, there was a huge, interest and everything. Then it went down again, right, for a few years. Then deep learning came up and we started dealing much more with, image recognition, which I think is a great application of artificial intelligence. So then another big, spike of interest that actually is leading to these new language models, right? There are similarities. And so sometimes, we tend to, again, to humanize these technologies to the point that our expectations of what they can do becomes the same level of expectation we would have from a human, but it's not that. So I think that if I was an enterprise outside of mine, of course, I would spend time trying to demystify, in a way, what these things can do, but at the same time showing the value that they can provide, because there is a lot of value out there. Right? It's just that, unfortunately, what happens is that people get overhyped and then they get over disappointed. And so, maybe in a year from now, we're going to say that ChatGPT was a great failure, even if it's actually an incredible innovation. I don't think so, right? But it could happen. It could happen because people, think that these things can do things that are, comparable to what a human being can do. They can't right now.
What advice do you have for folks in the enterprise who are business leaders and technology leaders who are looking at these kinds of technologies and trying to figure out what to do?
The bottom line is that this is going to go really fast. Again, right? I was saying at the beginning, it's an arms race between super powerful companies that have a lot of money to invest, right? Then you start getting into, government, etc. So I think this is going to be exponential. The speed of this innovation will be exponential. I think we're just seeing the beginning of it. Okay. And so I think that there are two things to think about. So one is there is no, right now, you need to be knowing what it is and being able to understand how to apply it to your business. So there is no postponing it. I say, I'm not going to be an early adopter. I'm going to be a very fast follower. Very fast follower is super fast follower. Very fast follower could be in 6 months. So I think for large enterprises that can afford to do that, I think there is the need of experimenting, hiring the right talent, or training the right people to get to a good handle on where this industry is going. Right? You have to be keeping an eye on this. That's the bottom line. And then the other thing is that I think lots of questions, very, very good questions about the ethical implication, the bias, and all of that. It's really important because it has a massive brand impact, right? So there is also a risk management side around these technologies that has to be understood very well. So if I would be a CEO of an organization, I would push my technology team to have the right skill sets to understand what it is and where it's going. And at the same time, I would put in place, some risk management thinking around it as well.
To what extent do you think that the developers of these tools and the folks who are gathering the data sets need to have that ethical understanding? And the reason I ask is because historically, technology was kind of separate from the ethical or the application of that technology from an ethical perspective.
It's absolutely critical, right? And, think about what's happening, with social media, right? So it's how important it is that content moderation in social media. So, this is not exactly the same, of course, but, if you translate it into this space, there is opportunity for abusing these tools everywhere, right? And as I said, the brand impact is massive. So there is the need of, setting guidelines. So for example, internally at EY, we have specific guidelines on how to use the tool, what we can do and not do with it, right? For now, maybe they're a little bit restrictive, but we want to be on the safe side of things. And then we're going to open them up a little bit more as time goes by. But, there has to be, but fundamentally, everything starts with the true understanding of what is available and possible, right? And if you don't understand that in detail, it's difficult to put, the boundaries around it.
And so today we're really at this phase where we're understanding what's reasonable, what's practical, what can we do?
Yes, and it shouldn't be underestimated in terms of the ability of driving innovation, but it shouldn't be either overestimated in terms of being a sentient being or anything like that, because that, I think we're far from that.
I have to say the interesting thing about this question to me is the fact that people have this conversation because at times these chats
It looks real.
mimic human conversation so
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think what they have done is absolutely one of the, in my mind, one of the most incredible inventions of the last, definitely this century, right? I mean, been the iPhone, I mean, mobile phone, social media, all that kind of stuff. Great. I think it's super important. But this one, it goes towards another level of innovation because it impacts our, it's really like, it's almost like looks like reasoning, right, of a human, right? So it's absolutely incredible. So I'm super excited about it.
And why don't we finish up with another question from Arsalan Khan, who says on Twitter, what do you hope future iterations of AI can do?
I think the future iteration, I think it has to be more transparent, right? So that you guys have asked fantastic questions about bias, ethics, and all of that. So that is the problem, right? So if these technologies are powerful, if they go in the wrong hands in terms of being able to generate content that shifts behavior, so public, understanding of things, it's really dangerous because we're basically adding another layer of intermediation between us and the sources of knowledge, right? So if that is done with not the right ethical, I guess, it can influence politics, it can influence elections, it can do a lot of different things that we don't want. So I think that transparency and ability to monitor what it does and how it is trained, I think is really important. But then I cannot wait for the future because, like there is so much more. Think about the breakthroughs that we can have when the sum of the human knowledge is so accessible, right? And in such a smart way. I think, it will take years, right? It's not something that, on Monday we're going to, really implement nuclear fusion. That's not the thing. But in terms of stimulating a different level of thinking and summarizing this knowledge, I mean, it's incredible. I'm so excited about it.
We have one last question that snuck in under the wire. And so, how about if we finish out with something from Melvin Aguiar, who says, how comparable are products like ChatGPT to low code, no code? Will they coexist or eliminate the other? And I think he's referring to the fact that these tools are really optimized to help write code.
Yes, I think right now it's not that big yet, but definitely that is the direction. So you would ask, how much code would you have to write in 5 years when you can actually talk to a tool and say, can you build me this application with these characteristics, these inputs, outputs, data, etc. So I think the direction, I think what I say, like, the writing is on the wall in terms of, software engineering will have to be changed completely. It doesn't mean that there's not going to be software engineers. Absolutely not. But I think the role of the software engineer will have to change a little bit more and get closer to the business because you still need a human that can summarize those needs and requirements into an ask at the machine. But do you need, armies of people to code, routines in different programming languages? Maybe not.
And with that, unfortunately, we're out of time. It's been a fascinating conversation. I want to say a huge thank you to Nicola Marini Bianzino. Nicola, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
And everybody, thank you for watching, especially those folks who ask such great questions. I always encourage you to watch and ask questions. You guys are an amazing audience. But before you go, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button at the top of CXOtalk.com, our website, and subscribe to our newsletter. And tune in for our live shows, and we will see you again next time. Have a great day, everybody.